Isaiah 26. We're going to try and do a slightly longer passage this week. We're going to go through to verse 15. So let me read through. We're picking up in verse 7. So let me read from. We're picking up in verse 7, but let me read from the beginning of chapter 26, so that we have the entirety of the song, and then we'll pray and then we'll study. In that day, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. He sets up salvation as walls and bulwarks. Open the gates, the righteous nation that keeps faith may enter in. You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. Trust in Yahweh forever, for Yahweh God is an everlasting rock. For he has humbled the inhabitants of the height, the lofty city. He lays it low to the ground, casts it to the dust. The foot tramples it, the feet of the poor, the steps of the needy. The path of the righteous is level. You make level the way of the righteous. In the path of your judgments, O Yahweh, we wait for you. Your name and remembrance are the desire of our soul. My soul yearns for you in the night. My spirit within me earnestly seeks you. For when your judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world learn righteousness. If favor is shown to the wicked, he does not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness, he deals corruptly and does not see the majesty of the Lord. O Yahweh, your hand is lifted up, but they do not see it. Let them see your zeal for your people and be ashamed. Let the fire for your adversaries consume them. O Yahweh, you will ordain peace for us. You have indeed done for us all our works. O Yahweh God, other lords beside you have ruled over us, but your name alone we bring to remembrance. They are dead, they will not live. They are Rephyim, they will not arise. To that end you have visited them with destruction and wiped out all remembrance of them. But you have increased the nation, O Yahweh. You have increased the nation, you are glorified. You have enlarged all the borders of the land. Let's pray. Father, we pray that as we study your word tonight, that you will bless our time. May we feed richly on your word tonight. And Lord, may you be glorified through our study this evening. Amen. Amen. Okay, so we're still slowly making our way through Isaiah's little apocalypse. It is one of the key eschatological sections of Isaiah. We've seen him deal so much with what is going to happen in the day of the Lord, the judgment, and then at the end of that day, the return of the Messiah and the arrival from their perspective of the Messiah, and the judging of the nations, the restoring of all things, and the redeeming of Israel. And we've even had a few glimpses beyond the kingdom into the eternal age. And when we came to chapter 26 last time, we saw the key issue of the strong being laid low and the ones who are humble being lifted up. That's really how the first 6 verses panned out. And really in the first 5 verses, there was virtually nothing new that we hadn't seen, not only in Isaiah, but actually within this little apocalypse from the beginning of chapter 24. We saw the destruction of Babylon, the strong city there. The strong city, the restoration of Israel in verses 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then verse 5, we see the lofty city, the proud city. And that's Babylon that is brought down. And so these 2 key themes that we've seen so many times in Isaiah, the restoration of Israel, the final redemption of Israel, and the condemnation of those who oppose them, and specifically the nation of Babylon, becomes very clear again here. And really the only part of verses 1 to 6 that brought us anything new, which was quite a twist if you look at it chronologically, was in verse 6, when he says, the foot tramples at the feet of the poor, the steps of the needy. And as we saw already in this section, the poor and needy seem to always refer to the remnant, the believing remnant of Israel. Israel when they believe, those within Israel who do believe. And it is Babylon who is proud and lofty who are brought down. And the actual destruction of Babylon is done by those who are humble, the believing Jews who waited on the Lord, and they are the ones who actually destroy the city of Babylon. Remember, when Jesus returns and destroys the Antichrist, though he is in charge of Babylon, he's the ruler of Babylon, he's not going to be in Babylon. He's made a big journey with his army. This is kind of outside the scope of this text, but broader within Scripture. He's made the journey to where the Jews are gathered up, which is in a place that the Bible refers to as Bozrah. And we'll see that later on in the book of Isaiah. And therefore Babylon is left unguarded. And it is there that the Jews will go and they will destroy the poor and the needy. Okay. Now, the only other thing from last week that I want us to remember moving into this section is that we had key repetitions. Key repetitions. There was within those verses the repetition of God's name, Yahweh or Yahweh or Yahweh, which is translated in verse 4 as Lord God in capital letters. Then in verse 5 we had the laying it low, repeated. And where was the one before that? He says, open the gates, the righteous and the faithful in. I think it was that he trusts in you, trust in the Lord forever. Say again out loud. Peace, peace. There you go. Perfect peace. There you go. It's all coming back now. Perfect peace, which is literally peace, peace. Shalom, shalom. So there is a double peace, shalom, shalom. There is a double Yahweh, and there is a double laying low. God's there in the middle, and there are the ones who have peace, and there are the ones who are laid low. Now, that concept of repetition, which is fairly common in the Psalms anyway, continues in a less specific way, but a more repeated way in this next section. We're going to see lots and lots of repetitions. And these repetitions, as repetitions always do, they make a point clearly. They emphasize something. So as we go in, let's note all these repetitions, all these parallels that are given to us. And it's very common in Hebrew poetry that they would have this parallelism. So again, as we hit verse 7, let's just get our context. The Jews are rejoicing because they have been redeemed. They are going into Jerusalem at the beginning of the kingdom, and Babylon has been destroyed. That's the rejoicing song, and that's the time that the song is being sung. So it says here then, the path of the righteous is level. You make level the way of the righteous in the path of your judgments. Notice the repetition of path. Notice the parallel between path and way. Notice the repetition of righteous and the repetition of level. And level, of course, parallels with righteous. The way of the righteous is level. They do what's right. It's almost like a repetition. The righteous are righteous in a sense, but with different words. That they do what is right. That their path is level. They don't deviate from that path. And so all those repetitions make the points of emphasis for us very, very clear in this poetic form. Just as like when we sing our worship songs, we repeat themes and concepts so that these things stay in our mind. The one who is righteous walks righteously. Their way is righteous. They live in a righteous manner. And the Jews had always conceived themselves to be God's people, but they weren't righteous. And their return to Yahweh has made them righteous. But notice and again, we're going to see this a lot in this next section of poetry. It's essentially a psalm, by the way, guys. I know it's Isaiah, but it's essentially a psalm. What we see a lot is parallels, where the parallels are saying the same thing, and yet at the same time there's a slight distinction. And this is a really good example of that. Their way is level. The way of the righteous is level. But at the same time, it is you, that's God, who makes their way level. In other words, they're righteous. The Jews are now righteous, right? But why are they righteous? Because God made them righteous. This has been a theme of Isaiah right from chapter 1. That there is going to be a redemption of the Jews, and he will bring about that redemption. That he is the one who will do it. And so there is the repetition of their ways being righteous, but here there is a distinction that God is the one who makes their ways righteous. Verse 8, in the path of your judgments, O Yahweh, we wait for you. Your name and remembrance are the desire of our soul. My soul yearns for you in the night, my spirit within me earnestly seeks you. Now there's a whole bunch of repetition going on here in this whole of this next section. He says in verse 8, in the path of your judgments, and the judgments are mentioned again midway through verse 9. He talks here about the desire of our soul, and then we have the yearning of the soul, repetition of soul and repetition of the concept of desiring and yearning, longing. And then we have that again, where we have the repetition of soul and our hearts and spirits. There are these other concepts that declare the same thing. And these things are all repeated. So there is a lot going on. And I think I'd even go so far as to say that when it says, "O Yahweh, we wait for you," and your name, there is a repetition of, in a conceptual sense there, in that his name is Yahweh. That's a repetition. Okay? So this is all going on to point these things out to us, to emphasize them. Okay? So, in the path of your judgments, O Lord, we wait for you. Now, I want you to see there's another layer of parallels here, comparing God and man. So the ones who are righteous, their path, their way, the way they are, it's level, it's straight. And then it says, in the path of your judgments. So the path of the righteous, in some way, shape or form, involves the judgments of God. Now remember, whenever we talk about waiting on God, we're not talking about sitting there twiddling our thumbs. We're not talking about some sort of Eastern mysticism kind of waiting, which is what so often happens in the charismatic wing of the church. Sort of like, we're going to wait on you now, Lord. Just waiting on the Lord. That's not what it means. Waiting on God is a trusting in him. It's not waiting for him to reveal something. It's because he's revealed who he is that we wait and we trust, knowing that he can be trusted. That's what it means. So in other words, somehow the righteous path, the path of righteous people, is such that in that path, the path is the path of your judgments. There's a linking between the path of the righteous and the judgments of God. And in the midst of that, it says, we wait for you and we trust you. In other words, the righteous person sees God judging, sees the hardships, sees the trials, sees the sufferings, and trusts God in the midst of that. It's powerful stuff here. But there's a deeper meaning as well that he's going to reveal in a short while. But while speaking of him, Yahweh, his name, notice the repetition of Yahweh here. We had Yahweh, the double Yahweh, in verse 4. We had Yahweh mentioned before that in verse 4 as well. And now we have Yahweh again here and the reference to his name. This is repetition, repetition, repetition. That it is who he is. It's his character. It's his attributes that is the basis for their covenant relationship with him. And more to the point, him keeping his covenant despite their unfaithfulness. That's the point of his name. And so they are trusting in his character, they're trusting in who he is, and they say that your name, your character, and remembrance, them remembering him, that concept of remembrance will be repeated as well. That's going to become crucial to the whole of this section. And it's good, by the way, it's good. The whole remembrance thing here. Are the desire of our soul. In other words, what our soul desires is you and remembering you. Remembering who you are. Okay? That's the desire of our soul. What do we want? We want to know Yahweh, and we want to remember Yahweh. When do we want it? Now. You get the gist, right? That's the desire. That's what we're after. We want to know God, and we want to remember him. And I think contextually, remember him in times of waiting when the path of the righteous brings us through judgment. That's the point. Now, let's remember contextually where we are. This is the song of the righteous Jews, and the righteous Jews have gone through the greatest suffering that they as a nation have ever or ever will need to go through. In the time of the Second World War, during the Holocaust, it is estimated that 1/3 of all living Jews died. In the time of the Day of the Lord, which is my preferred term. I know Christians typically say tribulation, but I prefer the term Day of the Lord because it's used more often in the Bible. But in the time of the Day of the Lord, 2/3 of all Jews will die. It's going to be a great time of suffering for them. But the third that remain will come through that trial purified, and thus all Israel will be saved. Every one of them at that time in that generation will trust in Jesus and place their faith in him and thus be saved. That's the path of the righteous. So what's being said here, I think, beyond the fact that we are righteous people, so we live righteously, though I understand that's probably the most obvious meaning, I think there is an implication in the context here that your ways for the people who have become righteous is straight. That you had a plan, you had a path, and you led us on it. And it was a good path. It was a good path. Why? Because of who you are, because of your name. And you kept us, and you preserved us in that path. And there was the path of the judgments. And now at the end of it, their name and their remembrance of God and the remembrance of what he's done, which most recently, historically, prior to their salvation, has been the worst 7 years of their history. They remember that. There is remembrance of the ways of God. If you think I'm reading too much into this, I want you to understand that this is a theme that is simply being repeated. That the end of Moses' life in Deuteronomy, where we have, I think, chapter 32, the Song of Moses at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses refers to God as being, he says, "Oh Lord, the rock of my salvation." Now, we're familiar with that term, and I hope, and we know it well. And he says, the rock, his work is perfect, and all his ways are justice. How did the rock play a role in Moses' life, other than it being a term for Yahweh? Well, the first time he struck the rock and water came out and the people rejoiced and God was glorified. The second time Moses was kind of not happy with the Jewish people, and he was supposed to speak to the rock, and he struck it a second time rather than speaking. And God in his grace still gave them water, but Moses didn't get to go and see the promised land. His entire life was building to his role as the shepherd of Israel. He led them through the Passover, parted the Red Sea into the wilderness, led them through the wilderness to the promised land, and they rejected him. They rejected going in. And then ultimately Moses himself was not allowed to go into the promised land because of his sin. And what does he say at the end of his life? Making specific reference to the rock, the incident that prevented him from going into the promised land. And he says, your ways are perfect. They're level. There's no veering. God didn't come along and say, hey, you know what, Moses, I've got this great plan for your life, and oh no, you've struck the rock. Oh, well, I'm going to have to change my plans. God's plan was in place and it was perfect. And Moses said that God's ways were perfect and just. Guys, I want you to understand this. I think maybe we can understand it to some degree. If we've had a hard life, and I've come across people who've had horrifically bad lives, and through those lives, God brings us to a place of salvation. Or possibly from salvation, he gives us hard times and brings us to a place of maturity. We can look back and say, well, that was horrific, but God used it for his glory. And there's an element of that going on in the text here. And I believe that it's a place of maturity to be able to look back on horrific times and say, God, your ways are perfect. You are sovereign. Your ways are level. Your ways are perfect. Your ways are just. Thank you. I think that it's an even greater act of maturity when we're going through those hard times and we don't see the end and we don't see the purpose and we don't see the result, to still say, you're the rock. Your ways are perfect. This is the context that we find ourselves in. And I hope, and I do dearly hope, that that we would, like the Jews, say, your name and remembrance of a desire of our soul. I think sometimes, before we suffer, the desires of our souls are numerous. And there's nothing like a bit of hardship to make us focus on what really matters. And it is through the fires that they say, your name and remembrance is a desire of our soul. And I could give you, back in chapter 24 when they were singing, there was similar kinds of concept. That there they were giving glory to the God of Israel, remembering his name. And this is really the essence of the Psalms as a whole. Just this idea that we remember God, we remember who he is, and we remember what he's done. Let that be, they say. And I think that's why they're singing, to do exactly that. Now, verse 9 has this repetition of the desires and the yearning. My soul yearns for you. That's a kind of a conceptual repetition of the name and remembrance being the desire. My soul yearns for you in the night. Night here would be used symbolically in the sense of darkness. Clearly, this is what's being said. Again, it's everything we're talking about contextually, through the trials, through the have you. My soul longs for you in the darkness. My spirit within me earnestly seeks you. It was through the darkness that they came to a place where their spirit earnestly sought God. They did not seek God. And then through the darkness they did. When the day of the Lord gets underway, there will be very few, if any, who are saved. The church will be gone, will be taken away. We don't know the exact time frame between the church going and the day of the Lord beginning. Some people think it's simultaneous. It could be, but it may not be. But nonetheless, we can probably safely say there'll be very few saved Jews. During the course of the day of the Lord, God saves many Jews. He anoints specifically 144,000 of them to go and share the gospel. There is the preaching of the gospel from an angel in the heavens. More and more and more of them become saved. And then finally, at the end, they are all saved. It is through the night that their soul yearns for God. It is then that their spirit earnestly seeks. God's ways are perfect. And then everything we're talking about gets summed up in this one little principle at the end of verse 9. This is powerful stuff, folks. Listen to this. For when your judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world learn righteousness. There's a guy I know who wrote an entire book about this, and it's a very, very big book. And this was his premise of pretty much the central theme of Scripture. A guy called Jim Hamilton wrote a book called The Glory of God Through Salvation and Judgment. In other words, God is glorified through saving and redeeming people, but God is also glorified through judgment. And one of the reasons for that is here. That even in judging, God is bringing about his righteousness. He's bringing about his glory. It's the most astonishing statement. That when your judgments are on the earth, then the inhabitants of the world learn righteousness. The implication is that if God isn't judging, you don't learn what righteousness is. If we have anarchy and people can do whatever they like, then no one knows what's right and what's wrong. But if you say, you mustn't do that, that's wrong, and you punish wrongdoing, then people know right and wrong. It's a very simple and basic principle. But the theological implications are astonishing. That, contextually, they as Jews have learned to be righteous. They have learned what righteousness is. They have bowed the knee before the righteous one because of the judgments of God upon them. I want you to understand this, folks, because this is going to be crucial in understanding the Bible as a whole. Okay? We do not have, on the one hand, a God of love, and on the other hand, a God of judgment and wrath. We have a God of love and judgment. A God of love and wrath. A God who even in his wrath is loving. Who even in his judgment shows love. We have a God who understands that the greatest thing for humanity is for him to glorify himself. And that's what he does in all of his judgments. He will be found to be just. The day will come when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, and nobody will be disputing that his ways were right. And the judgments will be included in that. God is abounding, Exodus 34, in steadfast love and faithfulness. And when he places judgment, even on his covenant people, he is not found to be lacking in that department. So that's quite a good few verses, isn't it? What a nice little lead in. It's going to get better, I think. Verse 10 wraps up this whole section. If favor is shown to the wicked, he does not learn righteousness. Okay? And that's, continuation of the same principle. If there's no consequence to sin, then you never learn righteousness, right? So if favor is shown to the wicked, he does not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness, he deals corruptly and does not see the majesty of Yahweh. Now, I think there's something more here. Okay, there's a principle here, right? That even in a land of righteousness, even when you're in a place of blessing, even when you're in a place where you're surrounded by righteousness, if you yourself are unrighteous, then you will do unrighteous, and you do not see the majesty of God. Now listen, I'm not one of those preachers that goes on and on and on about you're all sinners and original sin and woe to you sinners and stuff. I try and be fairly balanced in my preaching. But original sin is a very important doctrine. And this has huge implications for the Christian family. In a Christian household, in a household where the parents are Christian, you create a land. Let me use the words of a text here. I'm not saying that's what this is referring to, but and it's an application of it. The land of uprightness is the text here. When you have a Christian home with and your Christian parents, then you have a land of uprightness. Maybe you read the Bible with your kids. Maybe you teach them the scriptures. Maybe you sing worship songs with them. And at the very least, you're going to have certain rules and regulations, and they come to church and these kind of things, right? You're creating a land of uprightness. But look what the text says. It says that the wicked deals corruptly even in the land of the uprightness, and he does not see, but perhaps because he does not see, the majesty of the Lord. Now, I've had 5 kids, and they're all completely different to each other. I don't know how many personality types there are, but there's at least 5 because I saw them. And the reality is that some kids are fairly compliant, naturally. And if you have a compliant kid in the land of uprightness, they look upright because they're compliant. But they are still wicked until they have been redeemed from their sin by the blood of Jesus Christ. And so we need to be warned of that. And equally, there are children who are the opposite of compliant. That their resistance, their strength, for more neutral terminology, is unmistakable. the stereotypical strong-willed child. And we see those kids as being more wicked. Because there we are saying, you shall not do that. And the kid is saying, yes, I am. And we see, ha-ha, I spy wickedness. But wickedness is in the soul of them all until they're redeemed. That isn't to say that we say, oh, you're wicked, you're wicked, you're wicked, and we don't see goodness in them. It isn't to say that we don't see the goodness in them because they're made in the image of God. That's not to say we don't recognize good works in them and things like that. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just simply saying that we need to be cautious. But the interesting thing here is this, that the wicked will be exposed ultimately even in the land of uprightness. When the circumstances change, and often for kids raised in Christian homes, that's when they leave the Christian home. The state of their heart is actually revealed in a different way. Now, where are we contextually? Again, we're at a time when the Jews have now been redeemed, and they're coming into the kingdom, they're going into the city of Jerusalem, and they're rejoicing to go to the restored Jerusalem. Whether the walls are literally restored or not, we don't know. But for now, the walls are salvation. I'm guessing that the walls literally don't exist, because there's no need for it, because there's peace, because they've been saved. And God protects them, and they're trusting in God, and hey, heck, who needs walls? And so there they are going in, and they're rejoicing, and it's talking about how in the land of uprightness, the wicked still deal corruptly and still don't see the majesty of God. Has there ever been a land in the history of humankind that will ever be more upright than the land of uprightness? Right there, right then. Jesus is going to take up residence on earth in Jerusalem. The Jews are going to be there with him in the land, with him there and then, in the kingdom. Never has a land been more upright. Never has one's environment been so godly. I don't believe in Jesus. Oh, let's go and see him. He's in Jerusalem. The most atheistic arguments just disappeared instantaneously, right? That's an upright land. And there are those who are saved through the kingdom. There are Gentiles, we know from Joel chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 25, who are judged at the end of the day of the Lord and are allowed to come into the kingdom. And they are people who've just survived, like the Jews who've been saved survive, and they are able to clearly, from other passages, continue to reproduce. There's no glorified bodies for those people. We will have them as we return. That's one of the strangest things about the kingdom. People who have returned in glorified bodies, who are sinless. And then those who are saved but have not been glorified. And they will have kids. And each of those children will have a sinful nature. Now, Isaiah is going to deal with this theme more in the future. But what I want to draw your attention to now is that he's mentioned it once in the past already. Look back to the end of chapter 24. Do you remember 24? We've talked about this so many times. In that day, the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven, the kings of the earth on earth. Literally, that word punish means he will determine their fate. Yes? They'll be gathered together as prisoners in a pit. So there's Yahweh, and he determines the fate of angelic beings and human beings. Right? And then what happens? They'll be shut up in prison, and after many days, they will have their fate determined. There's a determining of their fate, and then after many days, there is another determining of their fate. Why does their fate have to be determined again? Wasn't it determined once already? And we see in the book of Revelation that the kingdom comes to an end after 1,000 years with the releasing from prison, same word as here, of Satan, and that he is loosed for a little while, and then there is one last rebellion. And who does he gather in that rebellion? The wicked, the sinners, who still exist, but they've been living in the land of uprightness. But even that is not sufficient for salvation. There needs to be redemption from sin. So this idea that the kingdom lasts 1,000 years, and after that time Satan's loosed, and after that time, there is one final rebellion, there's one final judgment, and then there is the eternal order. This is not new to the book of Revelation. This is the second time we've come across that in Isaiah, and it is not going to be the last time either. He'll be talking later on about those who will die in the kingdom. And those who are saved will never see death. But there are those who will still die in the kingdom. And so, the repetition of these concepts in Revelation comes along, but Revelation, on this issue, is really only telling us one new thing: the length of the kingdom is 1,000 years. That's all the Revelation is telling us. The rest of the details we pretty much already knew. And so, back to chapter 26. There is the favour being shown. Favour shown to the wicked. He does not learn righteousness in the land of the uprightness. He deals corruptly. He does not see the majesty of the God, of Yahweh. That is the ending of that whole section on judgment and on learning through judgment. And what they're saying is this: because they were made righteous through judgment, they are now the righteous, but the ones who are still wicked still don't see the majesty of God. They're not the ones desiring to see his name. They're not the ones desiring to see his remembrance. And that should be remembered. And this is why it's an important song going into the kingdom, because the wicked remain among them even into the kingdom. Not now, not at the time of entry, but once they have children, then the wickedness will return. Okay. And of course, there is in those who are non-glorified, there is still sin that they're committing, though they themselves are not wicked. Verse 11. This now then takes us on to a slightly different section. The song continues, and we see here the repetition. You'll see it in your text. O Lord, O Lord, O Lord. Verse 11, verse 12, and verse 13. And then, as we come to the end of this section, when we start the next section, that is an O Lord as well in verse 16. O Yahweh, O Yahweh, O Yahweh, O Yahweh. There is now here in this song a crying out to him. But so the structure is somewhat different. Many of the themes are repeated. And there is further repetition, but the themology, as it were, continues. Look at the connection between verse 11 and verse 10 before. O Yahweh, your hand is lifted up, and always speaks of the might and the power of God. Your hand is lifted up, but they do not see it. The wicked, in the land of uprightness, do not see the power of God. Can you just get your heads around how stupid that is? They're living on the earth during the kingdom when Jesus is physically ruling and reigning, and they don't see the might of God. And that is what I think is going on, is that because favour is being shown to them, they're not learning. Because they're in a place of mercy, because they're in a place of goodness surrounded. They just don't see the majesty of God, and they don't see his might. And so the prayer is, it's like instead he's saying, Lord, because your hand is lifted up, and yet they don't see it, here's the plea: let them see your zeal for your people and be ashamed. If they don't have judgment to ward them off, how are they going to ever see? How do unbelievers in the kingdom see the glory of God if they don't have the privilege of judgment that we've had and that they had in the day of the Lord that led them to a place of righteousness? If they have favour, how do they ever repent? And so the plea is, let them see your zeal for your people and be ashamed. That's point one. So the first thing that they need that they're praying that they would see, that the wicked would see to be saved, is they'd see how much God loves his people. How much he loves his people. And secondly, let the fire for your adversaries consume them. So let them see your love for your people, and let them see judgment, that though they themselves might not be judged, they would see the judgment of others and they would fear. So there's this twofold thing of fear of judgment and seeing God's love for his own, which is something that kind of has parallels even right now, obviously, in how, as to why people turn to God. But let them see it. Let them see. And I think that this is really the thing, is that we've already seen a reference going back to verse 8 of remembrance. There's this concept of your name and remembrance are the desires of our soul. They want people to remember who God is, remember what he's done. And you see that throughout the Psalms. You were the one that parted the Red Sea and led us through. You set us free from Egypt. This is so, the Passover just routinely is the basis of remembering who God is, and the basis of praising him in the future and trusting him in present trials. What do you think is going to happen in the kingdom? They're going to be remembering the final salvation of Israel. Now, are there any Jews that will need to be saved in the kingdom? No, Israel has now been redeemed forever. There will be no unbelieving Jews ever again. Pardon me. So when God is dealing with Israel in the kingdom, that seeing saved Israel should be a motivation for those who are unsaved Gentiles, that they too would turn to God, lest they be judged. So it's a plea for God to open their eyes. Verse 12. O Yahweh our God, notice the our God, I'm a verse ahead, verse 12. O Yahweh, you will ordain peace for us, for you have indeed done for us all our works. Now there is peace for Israel. They're not the ones at issue here. They have peace. Why? Because everything that needed to be done has been done. God's work in them is complete. But look at this. I love that expression. You have done for us all our works. Do you know, there is this constant tension in Christian circles between, do we have free will, and are we people who decide to follow Jesus and we're saved? Do we bow the knee before him, or does God ordain us before the foundation of the world, and does he declare us to be saved, and does he give us salvation as a gift? And the answer is quite clearly from Scripture, both. I just don't see there being a conflict here at all. And this is a wonderful example of it. It's just a wonderful example. Whose works were they that led them to the place of being a righteous nation? Well, it was their works. They did it. They repented. They turned to God. They cried out to him. They did it. And who did it? He did it. I mean, if you look at that statement, it is outrightly contradictory in our mindset. And yet there is book after book, argument after argument, Christian after Christian, just fighting over whether it's this or that. And the answer's clear. It's this, that. And there it is again. It's their works that they did that God enabled. And he did enable it. And he did those works for them. Their works that they did as well. Verse 13. This is where it gets interesting. O Yahweh our God. It's the Jews talking. It's their God, their covenant relationship. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. Again and again and again. It's the covenant name, the covenant relationship. The redeemed people going into the land that they were promised, and finally having the fulfillment of all of those promises of all time. For centuries, the majority of the church age, the majority of Christian scholars have taught that God will not fulfill his promises to the Jews as they are outlined in the Old Testament. And there they are going into the land, getting the fulfillment of those promises. Of course, those same scholars wouldn't believe this text because they would spiritualize this away as well. But there they are, and everything that was promised that looked impossible to so many people for so long, they're finally getting. He's their God. And then they look back and they say this: other lords. Now I want you to see the difference. O Lord, capital letters, is Yahweh. Other lords, small letters, Adonai. So this is not a repetition. They're saying, you, Yahweh, are our God, but we've had other masters. In fact, you've got all three names for God here in one. You've got Yahweh, El, and Adonai all together. But the Adonai here refers to other lords. Other lords beside you have ruled over us. Well, I think we know that, don't we? I mean, at the time of Christ, the Romans were ruling the land, weren't they? You go back through the Old Testament, there's all the Philistines, and there's the Assyrians, and the Babylonians, and so on and so forth. There's all these periods of time, the Medo-Persians. So there's all these periods of time when they've had other lords. So yes, we understand and we get that. But this is where it gets interesting. But your name alone we bring to remembrance. Now, the key thing to understanding this next little section, which is not easy, by the way, so I'm going to go slow here. And by the way, this section is the foundation to understand the even more complicated section next time. So we kind of got to get all this in place. But the key thing to understand is the repetition of remembrance. Our desire, verse 8, is to remember your name. Your name and your remembrance is our desire. Okay? Remember, those things that are dual often have one concept. Name and remembrance, remembrance of the name. We want to remember you. We want to remember who you are. We want to know who you are. And that's kind of the theme here, is it not? Yes? And here he says this. So we've had other rulers, but your name alone we bring to remembrance. Now, I think at this point we need to take a step back, okay? Do they remember who the Assyrians are? Assyrians? I don't know Assyrians. Babylonians? Never heard of them. Most of their people have been killed over the last 2 years, predominantly at the hands of the Babylonians and those submitting to them. They know the Babylonians. Okay? So when we're talking about remembering, in English, the word remembrance doesn't have any connection lexically to the word knowledge or know. You see, in English we have the verb to know and we have the noun knowledge, and you can just see by looking at them that know and knowledge, oh, they're related. Yes? Remembrance doesn't have that visual thing that we can see, but it's essentially the same thing. It's about knowing, right? Bringing to remembrance, knowing something again, yes? Everybody follow that argument, right? Okay. So we've said this a few times recently, and you should know this by now, but when the Bible talks about knowing God, it doesn't simply mean knowing who he is in an intellectual sense. It never has been. Adam knew Eve. Right? I mean, if we were to apply the same logic to everybody that knows our spouse, it would get a little bit immoral, to say the least. You know, right? There is a knowing that is an intimate knowing that's a different thing. And you know, aside from the imagery, that's deliberate, because covenant is so often a picture, or marriage is a picture of covenant, and covenant is a picture of marriage. These two are linked throughout Scripture. From Deuteronomy through Hosea through to Paul in Ephesians 5. And so this knowing of God that comes through covenant relationship isn't this intellectual, yes, I know about God, let me tell you about him. I'm going to write an essay or answer this these multiple points quiz, you know, get ABC and check the right boxes, and I know about God. Well, Satan knows a lot about Yahweh. In fact, Satan knows more about Yahweh than most Christians do, quite frankly. But he doesn't know him. He doesn't have that knowing relationship, right? So I think there is clearly, contextually clearly here, there is a relational aspect to remembrance. Do they remember in the purest intellectual sense who the Babylonians were? Yes. But they have no remembrance of them. What does that mean? That means they're now cut off from them. There is no harping back to the Babylonians. There is no, what the Babylonians did affects us now. There is no, we have to worry about the Babylonians will do in the future. They're gone. They're done. They're consigned to history. They're over. The Babylonians rose up against the Jews and put them into captivity. Time of Jeremiah. Were the Babylonians remembered no more after that? There was prophecies about the Babylonians that were still to be fulfilled in the future, and that are still not being fulfilled and will have to be fulfilled in the future to come. But there will come a time when there'll be no remembrance of them. You with me? Okay. And then he says concerning these other gods, they are dead, they will not live. That the English translation implies a direct parallel. Perhaps a better way of translating would be, being dead, they will not live. In other words, they're gone. They're not here to worry about anymore. But there's a degree of permanence now. Being dead, they will not live. And then it says, in many versions it will say shades. That's what it says in the ESV. Other versions might have words like dead and spirits and things. The Hebrew word is Rephyim. Rephyim. Now, there's lots I need to say about the Rephyim, but I don't have time tonight. I wanted to do, you'll see as we close in verse 15 how this section fits together, and I had to get this section done in one chunk. So I'm going to give you a very, very brief understanding of the Rephyim. And then when we come back to the Rephyim, because they're mentioned again in verse 19, not that you would know in your English versions either, we will talk about them more because that's crucial to understanding what's going on in verse 19. But the word shades is the Hebrew Rephyim, and the Rephyim were a tribe of predominantly of Nephilim. The Nephilim and the Rephyim are pretty much synonymous. In fact, if we're going to be technical, Nephilim is the generic term and Rephyim are the brand. There are, and I would do this differently if I was in England, because I would use other products like Hoover and Marmite that will mean nothing to you. But over here, I can say things like Kleenex and Xerox, and you know what I mean. I'm talking about brand names that have become so that have smothered our understanding so much that really we use them for anything else that's the same, even if it's a different brand. We talk about Kleenexes even when the brand is not Kleenex, though Kleenex was originally a brand. That's how it is with Nephilim and Rephyim. The Nephilim are the tissue, and the Rephyim are the Kleenex. The Nephilim are the copier, and the Rephyim are the Xerox. Okay? They just became synonymous. The Nephilim, as many of you will know, come from Genesis chapter 6, is where we're first told about them, where the sons of God, that's angelic beings, married the daughters of men, and they had this bizarre offspring that were giants called the Nephilim. And they became so prolific over the world that God had to end up destroying the world with the flood. That's why they're in Genesis 6, immediately before the flood. We're told that they were there at that time and also afterwards. And there's a long history of the Rephyim that I'm so tempted to get into, but I'm looking at the clock and I know I mustn't. And I have actually, on one occasion recently, gone through a history of the Rephyim and did it in 2.5 hour sessions. So there's a lot that could be said, let's just say that safely. So suffice to say that these Rephyim were beings that were half angelic and half human, which is very bizarre to us. Go with it, we'll talk about it more next time. That were destroyed in the flood, but that also came back again afterwards, though they were more limited in their spread. And the last of the Rephyim were killed by Moses, just before the end of his life. A gentleman called Og, lovely name, short name, long body. He was king of Bashan. And he was the last of the Rephyim, and he was killed. But when you have Rephyim, who are literally offspring, as I say, of angels and humans, when they have kids, there's Rephyim blood, as it were, still in them. So even after that time, there's people like Goliath, who were giants, just not quite so big. And the interesting thing in this is that by the time we get to the time of the book of Psalms and the book of Proverbs, Rephyim are used sort of hyperbolically, I think it is. In other words, there's the realm of the dead, and then there's a deeper realm with people who are more dead than the dead. There's a level that you can go that's lower than the realm of the dead. You can go to the depths of Sheol, and if you go beyond that, you go to a place called Abaddon, which is the realm of the Rephyim. Because after a certain point in time, they were all gone, they were done, they were finished with, that's it, they are remembered no more. And in Psalm 88, where the Rephaim are mentioned, it specifically says they're remembered no more. The same concept. The Rephaim are now renowned as the lowest level of Sheol and ones who are remembered no more. What's fascinating here then is that we have that understanding of who the Rephaim are. It gives us interesting insight in verse 14. Being dead, they will not live. Who's they? The lords who used to rule over the Israelites. Being a Rephaim, they will not arise. What's he saying? This is very interesting. I've told you this so many times. We don't see it in our world today, and perhaps we should. But for every human ruler, there is an angelic ruler. I mean, maybe I can't categorically say it like it's like a one-for-one equivalency. But when you have the human ruling that nation, there was the God of that nation who was doing his work as well. We see at the end of chapter 24 that the kings of the earth are judged, but also the hosts of heaven. These two are always in parallel. We think that we're this advanced time who don't think in those kind of terminologies anymore, and we're the ones who are backward. We think that everything is materialistic, and we don't recognize the realm that is unseen around us. I think what is being said here is that he is pointing to the angelic rulers overseeing the various nations that have lorded it over Israel. And what happens to the angels? Well, ultimately they'll be judged. The demons will be judged at the end. But those who dared come down and spread their seed dies like men. They come down to create a seed, to create offspring, to create their own progeny, these demonic beings. And they have this progeny, and what happens to those beings? They die just like any other men. And when they die, where do they go? Not just to Sheol, but to the lowest parts of Sheol, to Abaddon, the realm of the Rephaim. There's two possibilities here. Possibility number one is that Isaiah is saying, your rulers who ruled over you are completely finished. They will never rise again. They are dead forevermore. You never have to think of them. They are remembered no more. Kind of like the Rephaim, because that's how the Rephaim was spoken of at that time. You see it in the Psalms. You see it in the Proverbs. Okay? On the other hand, there may, in addition to that, be the implication of angelic rulership over the nations that ruled over Israel. I think it's both and, not either or, myself. To that end, you have visited them with destruction and wiped out all remembrance of them. These lords, these nations, these enemies, these Rephaim, they are all remembered no more. They're remembered no more. Their place in history has come to an end. Their purpose in history, God using them for his judgments to bring his people to righteousness, has come to an end. They will be remembered no more. Israel will no longer have any enemies. And that is seen clearly in our final verse tonight, verse 15. But you have increased the nation, O Yahweh. Repetition of divine name. You have increased the nation. Repetition of increased the nation. You are glorified. You've enlarged all the borders of the land. A little bit further back we saw the pleading for the people to be ashamed, to see their sin, because they see the zeal that God has for his people. And thus here, in repetition to that, we're told that God is glorified through the increasing of his nation. The Jews have been increased numerically, and the Jews have been increased geographically. The land that was promised to them originally, to Abraham, has never been taken. They have never, not even in the high days of Solomon, not in the days of Joshua, they have never had the land that was given to them. But then they will. And God will be glorified. Even most Christians today say, oh, that's never going to happen. You can't take that literally. It's not meant to be understood that way. How much so, more so then, when the people found it too incredulous to believe, will God be glorified when it finally happens? And there you see the contrasting fates. The poor and the needy trample down their enemies, and they will have no more enemies. Their enemies will be remembered no more. And God will be glorified as they enjoy the peace of the kingdom of Yahweh, when their enemies are laid low. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. Thank you for this amazing passage of Scripture. Father, may we trust you, trust your word. And as we see your plans and purposes laid out before us, may we rejoice in them and glorify in them, we pray. May your will be done in all things. Amen. Amen.